at the right time of the season. Through 28 games, she's averaging 17.3 points, a league best 18.3 assists, and 5.8 rebounds. And I always stress those rebounds are coming from a guard. 5.8 rebounds. Now, her success as fans, looking back to some comments that Geno Auriemma, UConn Lady Huskies coach, made back in June, and he ripped different parts of her game. He blasted her fans, their intellect.
Geno Auriemma called Caitlin Clark not built for the WNBA and labeled her fans delusional. Fast forward 6 months, and basketball's most stubborn coach can't stop praising her. What made him completely flip his opinion on live TV? The story behind his dramatic change of heart reveals something bigger than basketball, and it's not what anyone expected.
But we're going to be looking back at Coach Geno Auriemma of the UConn Lady Huskies and some comments he made just a few months ago about Caitlin Clark. And you've heard it said before, so I'm going to say it again. Those comments did not age well.
Let's rewind to when Geno Auriemma first shared his thoughts about Caitlin Clark. Speaking on the Dan Patrick Show, he didn't mince words. He called her fan base delusional and claimed they were setting her up for failure. Strong words from a coaching legend.
So Geno Auriemma talked about Caitlin Clark again. This ought to be fun. Anyhow, he was a guest on a podcast, Make a Difference with Phil Martelli, who obviously Phil Martelli also a coach, longtime coach in college basketball.
His main argument: Clark wasn't physically ready for the WNBA. He thought she'd struggle with the league's aggressive defenders and intense physicality. Remember, this is coming from someone who's coached some of the greatest players in women's basketball history at UConn. When ARA speaks, people listen, and this time his words sent shockwaves through the basketball community.
But I would eventually play back his Dan Patrick comments for him, where he said that Clark didn't have the right skill set for the WNBA, and that her fans were delusional for thinking she would come in and have this instant impact. I'm paraphrasing, and get his revised take on that, because he was very wrong.
If you're a college player, and you're a great college player like Caitlin was, Ori said the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. He didn't stop there. He pointed out how betting odds had Clark listed 3rd or 4th for MVP before she even played a single WNBA game. In his view, this was a SL slap in the face to every WNBA player. But here's what makes this story fascinating. Clark didn't just enter the WNBA. She stormed in, leading the Indiana Fever. She averaged 19, 2 points, 8, 4 assists, and over 5 rebounds per game. Those aren't just rookie numbers. Those are star player numbers. The same player Ori claimed wasn't ready was now making veteran defenders look like they were the ones who needed to adjust.
People think it's a rocket ship, and really it's been an ascension. Just because you all been around doesn't mean everybody else has been around. And I credit Geno for saying that. He said they weren't paying attention. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't incremental growth. I've said that a billion times. There's incremental growth. But to act like the explosive growth didn't just happen is naive. It's naive. And then to, say that about Caitlin and then have to go out of your way to say something else and insert Paige into the conversation is something too.
The thing about Clark's game that really turned heads wasn't just her scoring. Everyone knew she could shoot. That was never in question. It was her ability to control the game's pace, to see plays before they happened, and to make her teammates better. She was doing things that even seasoned WNBA players found impressive. Remember when Diana Taurasi, another UConn legend, sided with Auriemma? She said Clark was in for a rude awakening. Well, if there was any awakening, it was for everyone who doubted her. Clark didn't just adapt to the WNBA's physical play, she thrived in it. She learned to use her quickness to create space, her basketball IQ to outsmart defenders, and her passing ability to punish teams that focused too much on stopping her shot. What's really interesting is how Clark handled all the criticism. She never fired back at Ori or anyone else who doubted her. Instead, she let her game do the talking. During one particularly memorable game against the New York Liberty, Clark dropped 35 points and 12 assists. After the game, she simply said, "I'm just trying to play my game and help my team win." That kind of composure under pressure, that's what separates good players from great ones. The transformation in how people talked about Clark was fascinating to watch. Early in the season, commentators would point out every mistake, every defensive lapse, almost like they were waiting for Auriemma's predictions to come true. But as the games went by, the narrative started to shift. The same analysts who questioned her readiness were now breaking down her highlights, analyzing how she was changing the game. Social media played a huge role in all of this. Every time Clark made a deep three or threw a no-look pass, the clips would go viral. The WNBA's social media engagement numbers shot through the roof. Game attendance spiked, especially for Fever games. Television ratings followed suit. Clark wasn't just proving her critics wrong, she was helping to grow the entire league. But perhaps the most telling sign of Clark's impact came from her fellow players. Veterans who had initially been skeptical started praising her approach to the game. They saw how hard she worked in practice, how she stayed late to work on her shot, how she studied film. She wasn't asking for special treatment or acting like she was above the grind of professional basketball. The Indiana Fever's coaching staff deserves some credit here too. They built their offense around Clark's strengths but didn't shy away from challenging her to improve her weaknesses. They worked with her on defensive positioning, on dealing with physical play, on all the things Auriemma had said would be her downfall, and Clark responded to every challenge. As the season progressed, something unexpected started happening. The very things Auri had criticized became Clark's strengths. He said she couldn't handle physical play. She learned to use it to her advantage, drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line. He said she wouldn't be able to get her shot off against WNBA defenders. She adjusted her release point and actually improved her shooting percentage. The stats tell part of the story. Those 62 broken records speak volumes. But the eye test tells an even more compelling tale. Clark wasn't just surviving in the WNBA. She was changing how teams had to play defense. Her range meant defenders had to pick her up practically at half court. Her passing meant you couldn't double-team her without paying a price. She was forcing coaches to rewrite their playbooks. One particular game stands out. It was against the defending champion Las Vegas Aces. Before the game, Aces coach Becky Hammond was asked about Clark. Her response: "We're not playing against a rookie tonight. We're playing against a basketball player who happens to be in her first year." That's the kind of respect Clark had earned. The media narrative started shifting too. Gone were the questions about whether she could handle the league. Now reporters were asking if she was changing the game itself. Her style of play, the long-range shooting, the flashy passes, the constant motion. It wasn't just effective, it was entertaining. She was bringing new fans to the sport, people who had never watched a WNBA game before. Looking back, it's almost funny how wrong the skeptics were. They said she was too slight to handle the physical play. She ended up being one of the most durable players in the league. They said her fancy passes wouldn't work against WNBA defenders. She finished among the league leaders in assists. They said she'd struggled to score. She became one of the most efficient scorers in the league. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. As Clark's success became undeniable, Auriemma's tone started to change. The shift was subtle at first, less criticism, more measured analysis, but something bigger was brewing, something that would lead to one of the most surprising turnarounds in basketball commentary. The basketball world started noticing a pattern. Whenever Clark's name came up in interviews, Auriemma would pause before answering. Gone was the quick dismissal, replaced by something that looked almost like admiration. People who knew him well could see it. He was wrestling with something. The question was, what had caused this change? This transformation wasn't happening in a vacuum. The entire landscape of women's basketball was shifting. TV ratings were up, social media engagement was through the roof, and at the center of it all was a player Auriemma had doubted. The numbers couldn't be ignored. Clark wasn't just playing well, she was helping to grow the game. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Other coaches were reaching out to Auriemma, sharing their observations about Clark's game. Fellow UConn alumni in the WNBA were telling him about what they saw on the court. The evidence was mounting. Clark wasn't just good, she was special. As the season progressed, the storylines around Clark evolved. It wasn't just about proving doubters wrong anymore. It was about watching a player help revolutionize the game. Her style of play was influencing younger players. Kids in gyms across the country were trying to replicate her moves. Her